All right, so we're diving into learning English as a beginner today. You've given us a ton of material to work with.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic.
So are we ready to unlock our inner polyglots?
I like that, unlocking your inner polyglot. It is interesting, though, how we get caught up in the weeds of, like, grammar and vocab
Yeah.
and forget about just how fascinating language is.
Right, like how the English alphabet isn't even truly phonetic. There are more sounds than letters, which is probably why pronunciation guides can be so confusing.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating is even simple letters like C and G can be really tricky for
Mhm.
people learning English. The sound changes depending on the vowel, like in cat versus city
Oh, right.
or gate versus giant.
Okay, yeah.
And mastering these sounds is like one of the keys to unlocking fluency.
Yeah, that's so true. It's like learning the rules of the game before you can play. Speaking of games, what about those vowel sounds? Any tricks to mastering those?
You know, one thing that a lot of people don't think about is like the physicality of pronunciation. Like, pay attention to where your tongue is in your mouth, if your lips are rounded. Even small adjustments can totally change the sound you're making.
So it's not just what you're saying, but like how you're saying it. And the source material also mentions the importance of immersion, surrounding yourself with English as much as possible, like changing your phone settings. I've heard of people doing that, but does it actually work?
Well, think about it this way. How did you learn your first language? You were surrounded by it. You were constantly picking up patterns and rhythms. So exposing yourself to English in the same way, whether through music or podcasts or even just your phone settings, creates an environment where your brain can naturally start to learn.
So you're basically training your ears to tune in. That makes sense. Our source also mentioned that just 1,000 words make up like the vast majority of spoken English, which is crazy.
It really is. It's the Pareto principle in action, that 80-20 rule. You can kind of hack the system by focusing your energy on the most frequently used words.
Like having a mental toolkit of essential phrases.
Exactly.
That makes me think about those language learning apps that focus on teaching you everyday phrases. Is it actually possible to learn a language that way?
Well, apps can be super valuable for building vocabulary and learning grammar, but to become truly fluent, you need to engage more actively. Like, you wouldn't expect to become a musician just from listening to music.
Yeah,
You have to actually play an instrument.
right. So how do we bridge the gap between passive learning and active speaking? The source talks about just starting to speak right away, even if it's scary.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Every time you stumble, you're actually learning and improving. Think of it like learning to ride a bike. You might wobble at first, but you eventually find your balance.
That's a good way to think about it. So for someone who's just starting out, where's a good place to begin?
I'd say start with simple greetings and introductions. Practice introducing yourself in different situations, like when you order a coffee or meet a new neighbor. You can even practice with your pet.
Right.
It might feel silly at first, but the more you practice, the more confident you'll become.
And what about writing? Our source mentions journaling as a helpful tool.
Absolutely. Writing helps to reinforce what you're learning. It strengthens the connections in your brain. You can start by writing simple sentences about your day
Okay.
or your thoughts. Even just writing a list of things you're grateful for can be helpful.
It's like building a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. So we've covered pronunciation, immersion, and
Right.
starting to speak and write right away. But what about grammar? I know a lot of beginners are intimidated by English grammar.
Let's break it down. Basic grammar doesn't have to be scary. Start by understanding the fundamental parts of a sentence: the subject, the verb, and the object.
Like, I eat pizza.
Exactly.
Okay, that seems manageable enough. But what about expanding my vocabulary? I feel like I need to learn 1,000,000 words to have even a basic conversation.
Remember that 80-20 rule we were talking about earlier? Focus on those high-frequency words first. You can use flashcards or create themed word lists. There are lots of ways to learn. Oh, and here's a pro tip. Pay attention to cognates, words that have similar roots in English and your native language. You might be surprised by how many words you already know.
That's a great tip. So we've got our pronunciation down, we're immersed in English, we're practicing speaking and writing, and we're building up our vocabulary and understanding basic grammar. What's next?
Finding your voice and connecting with others. The source really emphasizes the power of social learning,
Okay.
engaging in real conversations. That's where you really start to put everything together.
So let's talk about how to find those conversation partners. I've heard of language exchange programs. How do those work?
Basically, you connect with someone who is learning your native language, and you help each other learn.
Oh, wow.
It's a great way to practice and to share cultural insights.
That sounds amazing. And the source also mentions online communities. Are those helpful for beginners too?
Definitely. Online communities can be a great resource for finding language partners and for asking questions and getting support from other learners.
It's like having a global network of people cheering you on. But let's be real, staying motivated can be tough. What happens when you hit that wall of frustration?
Well, that's where the psychology of language learning comes in. It's not just about willpower. It's about developing a mindset that helps you embrace those challenges.
So it's not about being perfect, but about being persistent.
Exactly. Celebrate those small victories, embrace those mistakes as learning opportunities, and remember that every step forward, no matter how small, is progress.
That's a great reminder. So we've explored the fundamentals of learning English. We've talked about the importance of practice, and we've even touched on the mental side of things. But how do we keep that motivation going in the long run?
Well, that brings us to the next part of our deep dive, the art of staying motivated and finding joy in the journey.
All right, let's explore that. Okay, so we've talked about all the basics, pronunciation, grammar, all that good stuff. But motivation can be a real struggle. How do we keep that fire burning?
You know, it's amazing how much of this comes down to psychology. The source really stresses the importance of setting realistic goals. Instead of trying to become fluent in a month, what if you focused on mastering one new verb tense each week?
Oh, that's a good idea.
Or having a 5-minute conversation in English every day.
Yeah, those smaller goals seem much more manageable.
Right. It's like breaking down a marathon into smaller sprints.
Exactly.
And each time you hit one of those milestones, you get this boost of motivation to keep going. The source also talks about celebrating progress, no matter how small.
Oh, yeah, that's important.
Did you have a good conversation with someone in English? Give yourself a high five. Did you write a paragraph without having to look up every word? Do a little dance?
I love that. It's so easy to get caught up in what we haven't achieved yet. But recognizing those little wins can make a huge difference. Speaking of motivation, I remember when I was learning Spanish, I hit this wall. I was putting in the effort, but I just wasn't seeing the results I wanted.
That's so common. It's like climbing a mountain. You're going to encounter some rough terrain along the way.
Yeah.
What helped you get past that?
Honestly, talking to a friend who had been through something similar, they reminded me that language learning is a journey, not a race. And that it's okay to feel frustrated sometimes. Sometimes you just need a break.
Absolutely. The source talks about self-compassion. Be kind to yourself. Acknowledge the effort you're putting in. Don't compare yourself to others. Everyone learns at their own pace.
Right. It's like giving yourself permission to not be perfect, which can be hard.
It can be.
But so important. So we've talked about realistic goals, celebrating progress, and being kind to ourselves. What else can we do to stay motivated?
Well, one thing the source emphasizes is finding ways to make language learning fun.
Oh, for sure.
What are some of your favorite ways to learn? Do you like watching movies?
Yeah.
Listening to music? Reading books?
Oh, I love all of those. And I've definitely found that when I incorporate my interests into my learning, it becomes so much more enjoyable. Like instead of just drilling vocabulary, I'll try to write a short story in English about one of my favorite characters.
That's awesome.
Or I'll translate the lyrics to a song I like.
Those are great strategies. The source even suggests playing games in English. It can be a really fun way to learn new words and practice grammar without even realizing you're studying.
It's like tricking your brain into learning. Speaking of tricking your brain, our source mentions that learning a new language can actually have some pretty amazing cognitive benefits.
It's true. Research has shown that being bilingual can enhance brain function. It can improve memory and even delay cognitive decline.
Wow. So learning English isn't just about communication. It's about improving my brain power, too.
Exactly. It's a win-win. But it's important to remember that motivation isn't just about the destination. It's about enjoying the journey. The source talks about finding intrinsic motivation, that drive that comes from within.
So it's not just about external rewards, like getting a good grade or impressing someone. It's about finding that genuine enjoyment in the process of learning.
Exactly.
What parts of language learning do you find most enjoyable?
I think for me, it's those aha moments.
Yeah.
When a concept finally clicks. Or when I can understand a native speaker without having to ask them to repeat themselves.
Yeah, those moments feel so good.
They do. They're what keep us going. They remind us why we started this journey in the first place. It's about embracing the challenges, celebrating the victories, and finding joy in the process of becoming a more well-rounded person.
I love that. It's not just about learning a language. It's about personal growth.
Exactly.
So we've talked about setting realistic goals, celebrating progress, finding ways to make learning fun, and even tapping into that intrinsic motivation. Is there anything else the source mentions about staying motivated?
There is one final piece of the puzzle. Mindset.
Mindset.
Are you ready to explore that?
Oh, absolutely. I'm ready to climb that mountain of motivation. Mindset. It sounds kind of like a little mystical. How does mindset play into actually learning English?
Well, it's like the foundation. You can have all the tools and techniques, but if you don't have the right mindset, it's easy to give up. The source talks about developing a growth mindset.
Okay. I've heard that term before. Can you remind me what it means?
Sure. It's the belief that your abilities aren't fixed, that you can develop them through hard work and dedication. It's about embracing challenges as opportunities to learn,
Okay.
rather than seeing them as like threats.
So instead of saying I'm terrible at grammar, I would say I'm learning grammar and getting better every day.
Exactly. It's a subtle shift, but it can make a big difference. The source also talks about reframing how we think about mistakes. Instead of seeing them as failures, what if we saw them as valuable feedback?
I like that.
It takes the pressure off.
Yeah. And it lets us be more playful with the language. I mean, even native speakers make mistakes.
That's right. And the source also reminds us that learning a new language takes time. There will be moments of frustration, times when you feel like you're not making progress. But the key is to keep going, keep practicing, and trust the process.
Yeah, it's like planting a seed. You can't just water it once and expect it to grow overnight.
That's a great analogy.
You have to be patient and nurture it.
And speaking of beautiful things, the source also highlights the rewards of learning a new language. It's not just about communication. It's about opening yourself up to new cultures and experiences.
That's like unlocking a whole new world.
Exactly.
I've always wanted to travel to a foreign country and be able to connect with people in their native language.
It's such a rewarding experience.
It feels so much more authentic.
It does. And think about the friendships you can build, the stories you can share.
Sure.
Language learning can break down barriers and build bridges between cultures.
So learning English isn't just a practical skill. It's a way to live a richer, more connected life.
Exactly. And here's something else to think about. As you learn English, pay attention to how it connects to other languages and cultures. Explore the origins of words, the stories behind idioms, the things that make each language unique.
It's like peeling back the layers of history.
It is. It turns you from a passive learner into an active explorer.
I love that. Well, I think we've covered it all today. From the basics of pronunciation and grammar, to the importance of motivation and mindset, and even the amazing benefits of learning a new language. What advice would you give to someone who's just starting out?
Start small. Be consistent. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. Embrace the challenges, celebrate the victories, and remember that every step you take is moving you closer to your goal.
And find joy in the journey. I know I'm feeling inspired to dust off my own language learning app and get back to it. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.